A very warm welcome on behalf of Procter & Gamble Health. So this is an open up platform, and as the name suggests, it's actually truly a platform to open up. We do this. The academically oriented doctors like you, they come and they discuss the challenging cases. And to do that specifically, I have two senior doctors who are going to present their own data. Change the slide. Our first speaker, and it's our honor to introduce him, Dr. Tulsi Das. He is a consultant at Apollo Hospital, Chennai, and director at Sinus. Founder member of Secretary of the Sinus Endoscopic Society of India. He has the largest number of endoscopic DCRs done in country to his credit. Sir has actually presented a lot of videos in the international conferences and received the awards. Tearsina and dacrocystorhinostomy won the bronze medal in the World Congress of Otorhinolaryngology. He won the gold medal for the video on endoscopic reconstruction of CSF fistula in the World Congress of International Rhinological Society held in Washington. Sir has done lot of talks as a faculty in national and international forums and many publications in the field of ENT. Welcome you, sir. Is a senior consultant at ENT Head and Neck Surgeon at the Erode, a NAI ENT Head and Neck Care Center. Sir, and he's a national chairman of detection of congenital deafness. Sir also has served a lot of posts on the national and the regional academic forums. He's a past secretary of IMA NHB TNSB in 2016-17. Safe Sound, IMA headquarters. He's an honorary secretary of IMA TNSP for year 2014 and 15 and state president for 2010. Various topics. Welcome you, sir. To give about brief introduction about myself, I'm Dr. Suchita More. I've done my MBBS and MD in pharmacology from St. GS Medical College, KEM Hospital. Last 6 years, I'm associated with GSK, Pfizer, and now Procter & Gamble Health in Medical Affairs Division. Clinical research is something is my area of interest, and I've done a lot of publication, and pharmacology is the key subject that I'm focusing on. So without wasting much of the time now, I'm going to Tulsi about frontal sinus surgery. Welcome you, sir.
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. However much you check, recheck, and then, things can go wrong in digital. At the outset, I would like to thank Procter & Gamble for inviting me to give this, to be part of this presentation, and also webcasting to other localities. The topic given to me is frontal sinus, approaches to the frontal sinus. Before I go, how many ENT surgeons are here? Can you just? Okay, all right. Doctor, are you sure this is going to the other locations? You're getting it? Okay. All right. When you coming to the management of frontal sinusitis, basically there are two types of operations. The first is drainage procedures, second is obliteration procedures. Under drainage procedures, you have a number of procedures described. I will not go into all of that. It's important to know that there are two kinds of procedures. One is drainage and the other is obliterate the sinus for good. Now, frontal sinus is the most difficult sinus to operate upon because of the anatomical situation. So, many of the surgeons would find it difficult to operate on the frontal sinus. So, I'll just touch upon the various surgical procedures and the points to remember, etc. Unless you know the anatomy, you cannot do a meaningful frontal sinus surgery. Now, the uncinate process is the most important thing. A few anatomical points I'll touch upon. The uncinate process decides the drainage of frontal sinus. So, you have a pointer? Pointer irukka? Adu kudunga. Idhile irukka? Okay. So, the uncinate process is here. So, the frontal sinus depends on this uncinate process for drainage. So, here the uncinate is getting attached to the lamina papyracea here also. So, the drainage to the frontal comes medial to the uncinate process. Now, there are some variations in uncinate process. Can we put off this some lights? So it's the light off on mudiyuma. So as you can see here, this uncinate process that expands into a dome in the upper part. So the frontal drainage happens medial to the uncinate process in this situation. As you can see, sorry. Yeah. See that this is the bulla, and the uncinate process becomes a dome in the upper part. This is the commonest type of presentation, and the frontal has to drain either posterior or medial to the oh, excellent, that's beautiful. So the uncinate process. Here there's another variation. The uncinate process goes and gets attached to the skull base. So in which case the drainage of the the drainage of the frontal would be directly into the infundibulum, because there is no dome blocking the infundibulum. So it is directly drains into the thing. So these are anatomical points you should remember while reading the CT scan, so that you can do a meaningful surgery. And of course, in one patient itself, you can get both the types of uncinate insertion. Here it is to the lamina papyracea, and here it is going to the skull base. And what is frontal cell? Frontal cells sometimes, in addition to the uncinate, the frontal cells also can block the drainage of the frontal sinus. So frontal cell is nothing but lamina sitting on top of the uncinate process, but below the frontal sinus. There are 4 types of frontal cells described. Now, before I go on to the different types of frontal cells, one should define the frontal floor. Many people mistake this part to be the frontal floor. Actually, this is not the frontal floor. Actually, the frontal floor is right here. It is formed by the upper part of the septum and also the ethmoid. So the frontal depends on the ethmoid for its drainage. So these are all ethmoid cells, and sometimes ethmoid cells also can invade the frontal sinus, and I'll tell you how to classify these cells and how to identify them on a CT scan. Now, to identify the floor, you have to look at the various cuts, the coronal cuts of the CT scan. Sorry about that. So you can see here, either it's like a T or like the cricket stumps, the 3 vertical lines. So this is the frontal floor. So one should look for this. This is not the frontal floor. This is actually the anterior wall of the frontal sinus. The frontal floor is right here. So these are anatomical points that you should remember. Here again, this is not the floor. The floor is right here because that's obstructed by the ethmoid air cell system that is right under the frontal sinus. So that anatomical point you should keep in mind. Now, a cell, single cell here is called as Agarnaceae. When there are two cells, one below would be Agarnaceae, the one above would be a frontal cell. So here, just to show the Agarnaceae, this is an Agarnaceae single cell below the frontal floor. And of course here the type 1, Kuhn type 1 frontal cell. You have an Agarnaceae here, just above that you have the a single cell, it is called type 1 cell. Then when you have, again as an example of type 1 cell, type 2 Kuhn cell means there are two cells above the Agarnaceae, then you call it type 2 frontal cell. The idea of knowing all these cells is that you need to, when you're doing surgery, we need to remove all the cells so that the frontal can drain without any problem. So now Kuhn type 3. So when you have a single cell above the floor, the frontal floor once you define, and if you have a cell above the level of the frontal floor, then you call it type 3. And in a sagittal section, that cell should be anterior, not posterior. When it is posterior, it is called a bulla cell. Anterior, it is called type 3 cell. And this is an example of type 3 cell. So you can see here is type 3 cell, type 3 cell, type 3 cell. It's all above the frontal floor. So then you have this again type 3 cell. Type 4 cell, which is a large cell, extends halfway more than the height of the frontal sinus. So such a cell is called type 4 cell. So you can see here it's anterior again, and the height is more than half the height of the frontal sinus. This is an example of the type 4 cell. And of course frontal bulla cell, which is posterior. So just to show you the difference. So which means you should have a coronal cut and you should also have a sagittal cut to identify these cells. And coming to the drainage procedures, one cannot neglect Professor Draff. He is no more now, but he is an excellent surgeon. I had the pleasure of meeting him and also interacting with him in many conferences. He described three types of frontal drainage in case of frontal sinusitis. Draft 1, Draft 2 and Draft 3. Briefly we'll see what is Draft 1, 2 and 3. When you just do an ensinectomy, open the frontal outflow and don't do anything more, don't touch the middle turbinate, etc. It is called Draft 1. So this is what we commonly do in a routine sinus surgery. So now Draft 1, and I show you an example. See, this is very interesting case, as you can see there. So that is the frontal outflow, and what you have in front is the uncinate dome. It's very important to recognize this. Unless you remove this dome, you're not going to get drainage of the frontal. So which means this part of the uncinate, it's like a dome, it's coming up to the middle turbinate. So that's a dome, that's a blind end, it's a recess terminalis. So that has to be removed. So to do that, I'm using a 70-degree telescope. To do that, we need to use a curved instrument or a ball probe and break that. This is like eggshell. So you just have to break the bone, the upper part, and remove it. So once this part is removed, the frontal recess becomes quite wide, and the frontal outflow is facilitated. So here the eggshell is broken and it is removed using forceps. You can use a debrider now. This is a very old video. So we used very little of the debrider. So that's a debrider at work. And we take a look and still you are not seeing the frontal sinus. Most likely the frontal sinus is somewhere here. So we need to remove that lamina also. So there is one more cell, most likely a type 1 frontal cell, which needs to be removed before you can get a view of the frontal sinus. So that's the frontal sinus. This is a cell and this is a recess terminalis and part of the uncinate process. So this way we can open into the frontal, and the mucosa should be spared. That's very, very important. So there's another one, another case I will show you. I'm not going into the uncinectomy part and all that. I think you must have seen in many conferences. Here what you see is the lateral sinus of Grunwald, the anterior ethmoid artery here, and with the curved curate I'm trying to get into the frontal. So it's a kind of semi-blind because it can be done with a 0-degree telescope also. You can use a angle telescope if you want, but many people are not comfortable with that. So I do the initial dissection with the curved curate, kind of blind, and then remove the bone and also the soft tissues around that area. So there you can see that's a frontal cell. So you can see the discharge inside that. So you just remove the bits of bone hanging about. So that way the healing will be much better because the mucosa is intact all around. So that's the mushroom forceps. So that's a frontal cell, and this is the lateral sinus of Grunwald, anterior ethmoid artery here. So now coming to draft 2, which involves the drilling of the frontal beak here, and draft described 2 different types of draft 2. One is draft 1A, wherein you remove the floor of the frontal sinus up to the middle turbinate, and that is called draft 2A, and draft 2B, wherein the middle turbinate is removed up to the septum, the frontal floor is removed on one side, then you call it draft 2B. And I have never done a draft 2 because most of the times I'm able to get away with draft 1. Here it's a case where the draft 2 is done by the disease itself. It's a fungal ball. It's like cholesteatoma doing a mastectomy for you. So here the fungal material has done the surgery for you. So I'll just skip this video. And coming to draft 3, and Professor Draft is known especially for this particular type of surgery. This is nothing but an endoscopic, Lothrop operation, which was described about 100 years ago by Lothrop. Amazing how our ancestors, how they thought, how they learned anatomy and described surgical procedures that would really help us now. Now we have the light, we have the telescopes and endoscopes, so we are able to use the light and our special instruments to do this surgery quite successfully. So here the most important thing is that you should know what are the structures to remove in a draft 3. Draft 3, what you remove is the interfrontal septum and the floor of the frontal sinus on either side, and of course the agar nasae, the frontal cells, the antiethmoid cells, etc. So that way, finally at the end of it, you will get a cavity like this, and both the frontal sinus are at your disposal for removal of disease and also for drainage, for irrigation, whatever that you want to do. So that is the beauty of draft 3 procedure. Again, to show Lothrop, who described this about 100 years ago. And just show you a case which is a recurrent sinusitis of the frontal sinus, where you have done a draft 3. Doctor, can you keep a track of the time? Can you just tell me 5 minutes before I have to stop? Sorry, this is a very old video, this little bit of bleeding. Anyway, just ignore that. Soon you will be coming to the frontal sinus itself. See, there it is. You can, that's a left frontal sinus, the right frontal sinus. The interfrontal septum is being removed now. So you can clearly see inside the frontal sinus. Once you remove the upper part of the septum and also the interfrontal septum, everything become accessible for you. So here we are removing polyps which are hidden. Otherwise you could not have removed these polyps from the frontal sinus but for this procedure. And that is part of the floor of the frontal sinus on the left side. So there's a polyp in the left frontal sinus. It's being debrided out. So this is a very useful procedure for recurrent sinusitis which is not responding to your regular normal treatment. So sometimes you may have to do this procedure. Sometimes when you have a CSF leak also you may have to do this procedure. I'll just skip this video and go to the next one. When you have a lesion like this, far lateral, it is very difficult to reach it from the nasal cavity. You go into the nasal cavity with your endoscopes, try to reach it, may not be possible sometimes. So you may have to do some kind of an external procedure. So, and if you make large openings on the forehead, it could leave an unsightly depression like that. And this surgeon had put a vertical incision which is to be never to be done. Vertical incisions are not allowed on the forehead. It has to be horizontal incision if at all you want to do it. And don't remove the bone more than 5 millimeters. If you make a window of more than 5 millimeters in diameter, you're going to produce a depression. So to avoid that, we have devised 2 holes, sometimes 3 holes. So one hole would admit the endoscope. The second hole would allow instruments to be taken inside the frontal sinus. And this way it is possible to remove disease, polyps, minor tumors, fungal material, and also to repair CSF leaks. Here a patient with head injury, he developed right frontal sinusitis. And what we did was we made a hole in the frontal wall of the frontal sinus, removed the interfrontal septum, and he did quite well because the you see the scarring on the frontal recess. I don't think anybody could do a meaningful frontal sinus surgery there. So we did open the frontal sinus on the right side, and they see that machine oil kind of mucus was aspirated, and we removed the interfrontal septum on that side, and then he became really symptom free. Sometimes for drainage you may have to drill the frontal floor. You may not be able to drill that floor from the frontal floor from the nasal cavity, and you may have to have some guidance. So in a case like this, this patient had a trauma, and he had fracture of the frontal sinus on the left side, distorted anatomy, and again very small frontal sinus on the left side. So the problem was every time he had an upper respiratory infection, he went in for orbital cellulitis because there is some communication from the left frontal sinus into the orbit, and he used to develop orbital cellulitis. So he was kind of disturbed with this, and we decided to do a drill out procedure for him. For that, so this is a setup where we do multi-port frontal sinusotomy from outside. So you can see you can take an assistant's help. It's like a laparoscopic surgery. You make multiple holes in the abdominal wall, and then you do a laparoscopic surgery, something similar to that. So here, this patient, we've had difficulty in making an opening from below, from the nasal cavity side. So we did a external frontal sinusotomy, made 2 holes in the anterior wall of the frontal sinus on the left side. So there's one hole made. Sorry about that. It's not playing. The video is not playing. Okay, I'll skip that. If not playing, then we'll not waste time trying to set that up. Okay. In cases where you have a defect in the posterior wall of the frontal sinus, so you have a situation like this, which is a meningocele or an encephalocele from which you have a CSF leak. So in such a situation, previously we used to send the patients to a neurosurgeon, and they used to cranialize the frontal sinus, and this is what it looked like. So the frontal sinus is totally removed, and it was filled with the frontal CSF. Now we do this repair, or the other option is to fill the frontal sinus with fat. That's the other option. Now what we do is we use this multi-port external frontal sinusitis, make 2 holes, put in your endoscope through one hole, the instruments through the other hole, remove the encephalocele or meningocele or whatever, and then repair this defect. So the defect can be repaired like this. So we put a piece of cartilage inside the extradural pocket, and the layer of fascia on top, and a plastic sheet and a graft support, which are all tied and brought out through the nasal cavity, and after 1 week these things can be pulled out through this nasal cavity. So this here is a patient with a trauma, history of trauma, and there is fracture of the posterior wall of the frontal sinus, and we did
The white meningocele can be barely seen with a 70-degree telescope, but a meaningful repair cannot be done through this approach. We decided to do a multi-port external frontal sinusotomy. A template of the frontal sinus is cut and marked over the forehead. The incision is marked and made very close to the eyebrow to conceal the scar. It is deepened down to the bone. A self-retaining retractor exposed. A hope is passed through one port and the instruments are passed through the other port. A white meningocele can be visualized. A 70-degree telescope is used to see the various parts of the left frontal sinus. The lateral part of the frontal sinus and the intranasal sinusotomy are seen. The 4 mm telescope is passed through one defect, is inserted into the defect to be seated in the extradural pocket. A piece of temporalis fascia is spread over the cartilage graft as an onlay. 2 8-size suction catheters are passed into the frontal sinus through the ports and brought out through the nose. The plastic film and the merocell are tied to the ends of the catheter using 4-0 Mersilk. By pulling the catheter, the silk sutures are brought out through the nasal cavity. The plastic sheet is positioned over the grafts after placing a layer of Surgicel. The merocell is also inserted into the frontal sinus to be placed over the plastic sheet. In this case, the frontal sinus is quite large, and another piece of merocell is required for graft support. The nasal cavities are packed with merocell. The wound over the forehead is sutured in layers. The silk sutures are plastered to the nose.
See, whenever we have a defect in the skull base, we repair it with a cartilage. The cartilage goes into the extradural pocket. We create an extradural pocket. This is a dura. We create a pocket and insert the cartilage into that pocket, and then cover it with an onlay temporalis fascia or fascia lata or whatever connective tissue. So this is the well recognized way of repairing skull base defects, and this is how normally we, and this is published some time back in the JLO. And of course there is one more patient here with a how much time do you have? Do you have another 5 minutes? Yeah, okay. So another case here, something similar to that. So we use this monopolar diathermy to reduce the meningocele and push it in. Using micro ear instruments, we create an extradural pocket. And once a meaningful pocket is created, we harvest cartilage, either tragal cartilage or septal cartilage. Tragal cartilage is my favorite graft material because it has perichondrium on both sides. This is tragal cartilage. You can see the perichondrium on both sides, here and also on the other side. So a duroplasty is accomplished by inserting this cartilage into the extradural pocket. So on top of it, we place the temporalis fascia or fascia lata, depending on the size of the defect, and a piece of Merocel on top of it, and a plastic sheet over it, and Merocel on top of it. So this Merocel is important for a graft support. Otherwise, graft materials can get dislodged. So this is how we normally do it. This is a very interesting case. I'll just finish this with this patient. She came to us in a semi-comatose stage condition, not responding to any commands. She is not interested in eating. She passed urine in the bed, and when we saw her CT scan, this is how it looked. You see the kind of air cephalocele, which is eaten away the brain, and you see this cuts massive air inside the cranium. And what we did, CT scan. I thought this is the area of the defect, and we tried looking for the defect. We could not find one. So when we are inspecting, when I asked the anesthetist to do Valsalva, you see the air bubbles coming out from the cranium. That's a cranial side. That's a posterior wall of the frontal sinus, and air bubbles are coming from there. So a simple Valsalva, anesthetic Valsalva, could produce this air bubbles from the cranium. So what we did, we just made one hole in the anterior wall of the frontal sinus, just one hole there, and we found a very interesting and one-way valve. There's a mucosal tag sitting there, allowing air to go in one direction, but did not allow air to come out. So we reduced that with diathermy, and then the defect is so small, so we just have to push in some connective tissue between the dura and the bone, and she did quite well. The recovery is remarkable. So in situations of frontal sinus, we may have to open the frontal sinus anterior wall. Then you get a head-on view of the lesions inside, and we can do a meaningful repair or removal of the tumor or whatever. There again, you can see the air bubbles coming out. You can see some temporalis fascia inside, and she did quite well. So this multiport external frontal sinusotomy again was published in JLO some time back. And conclusions, it allows the otolaryngologists, the ENT surgeons, to do repair of the posterior wall of the frontal sinus, which was originally, traditionally done by neurosurgeons. The anatomy and physiology of the sinus is maintained. That's very important. And the surgeon gets a head-on view of the defect, and also you can do a meticulous preparation of the graft bed, accurate placement of the graft, etc. can be done. Again, the same thing. So with that, I close my talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, so much for the excellent presentation, and especially you focused on the challenges and all the cases were very difficult to manage, and very simple technology with very simple manner probably for the surgeons. My next talk is a very simple medicine topic. I know the audience is full of surgeons, and the medicine related topics are difficult for you all the experts. But it's only a 5-minute talk, and then we have a very interesting next presentation, again focusing on a very core surgical topic.
मेरा
ये प्रेजेंट इसके लगाइए ये Jenny, can you move faster, my presentation? Yeah. And I need the slide changer. This will work? Yeah. So good afternoon, doctor. Only 5 minutes that I want to take. So in the first part of this year, we did a ad board. Ad boards are usually to understand the insights. And we asked a very simple question, that what's the cause of nasal obstruction in India? And these are the answers that we got from the Indian ENT surgeon, and Dr. Raja was in fact one of the part of this ad board. And in case of adult, we can see that the DNS, atrophic rhinosinusitis, allergic rhinitis, and rhinosinusitis with or without polyps are the major causes of nasal obstruction. So today actually as a brand or as a molecule or a company which has a oxymetazoline molecule, we thought that we'll focus on the if we can helpful in the polyposis cases. Now I searched through all the guidance. So if I open the American guidance, they clearly mention that there is no role of topical decongestion in the polyposis cases. If I open the European guidance, all they mention is saline therapy and adjunctive role of topical congestion, something can be possible. But in case of British Society of Allergy and Clinical Immunology, what they mention that the topical decongestion in the patient with polyposis can be used if there is a ET dysfunction, or if the child has the acute otitis media, or in case of the post-URTI to reduce the nasal congestion. And something that actually attracted my attention to increase the nasal patency before the intranasal administration of corticosteroid. And that's very important because most of these patients, if I see, they do not respond adequately for intranasal corticosteroid, and the major reason that the reach of corticosteroid it will be limited because of the nasal congestion. So that can be reason that probably the oxymetazoline is working. After searching the data, this interesting article that I have got, that this oxymetazoline, is there any role in case of nasal polyposis? And it was a randomized control trial which was conducted in year 2012. What they did is a simple study. This was a case of nasal polyposis. The patients were divided into two groups. The first group received oxymetazoline plus mometasone nasal spray, and the next group received placebo and mometasone nasal spray. They gave it for the 4 weeks, and followed that they gave for 2 weeks. So they only gave 2 weeks this mometasone spray therapy, so that just to check is there any rebound congestion or tachyphylaxis which is associated with oxymetazoline. They used all the actually see the size of the nasal polyps, the mucociliary clearance rate, and the nasal and oral peak inspiratory flow index. And the results were interesting because at the 4 week and 6 weeks, oxymetazoline group, they actually show significant reduction in the blocked nose as expected, but also in case of the hyposmia. Now oxymetazoline as a molecule do not have any effect on the olfactory function, but still the hyposmia as a symptom was reduced, showing probably it may be additive effect to the intranasal corticosteroid. Peak inspiratory flow index again improved in the oxymetazoline group significantly compared to the placebo group. Nasal again mucociliary clearance time, it was improved in oxymetazoline group compared to the placebo group. An important and very interesting finding that nasal polyp size, that also in fact improved in case of oxymetazoline group compared to placebo. Now as a molecule, oxymetazoline will never able to reduce the nasal polyps because it's not its mechanism of action. Still the significantly improved result, probably because of its additive effect in case of the intranasal corticosteroid, it may be the facilitating the role of intranasal corticosteroid. Can you, yeah. So the facilitation of the role is not maybe limited to nasal polyposis. It is also seen in case of allergic rhinitis or non-allergic rhinitis also. So any asthma patient, we always combine the beta-2 agonist, and we combine usually the corticosteroids. And usually this combination is synergistic. So why combination is synergistic? Because whenever we give corticosteroid, it will actually maintain the upregulation of the adrenergic receptors. So it actually makes sure that the tachyphylaxis do not occur. So if I am giving oxymetazoline, an intranasal corticosteroid, the intranasal corticosteroid will make sure that there is a upregulation of adrenergic receptors. So tachyphylaxis, which is seen in oxymetazoline, after it gives 10 days of therapy, it's usually not seen if I am combining with intranasal corticosteroid. So majority of the studies, what they have used, that they have used the combination for the 4 weeks of therapy, and which actually did not show any rebound congestion. But there are no studies that I could find which actually gave long-term therapy beyond 4 weeks. But what we actually can see, at least for the 4 weeks, the combination was had a better safety profile and good efficacy profile also. So though to conclude, I can say that there is still not the evidence, lot of data for this combination, but the patients who are not adequately controlled by intranasal corticosteroids, adding oxymetazoline for some duration probably might help in the patients. So with that, I think I conclude my study and 5 minutes talk. And now let's go to one of the, again, very, very interesting core surgical topic, pitfalls of functional endoscopic sinus surgery. And I invite Dr. Raja to come on the stage and take the session. Close this, open the other. Where is the other person? I mean,
Good afternoon to everyone. First of all, I thank the Procter & Gamble for giving me an opportunity to share this platform on this webcast. I think still I could see many people are very awake after a very good sleep and after 2 excellent lectures. Of course, Dr. Tulasidas has given a good idea about the laparoscopic aspect of the sinus surgery. Myself and Tulasidas known to each other for more than 35 years, I believe, and I really enjoyed his talk. Also, the talk of Dr. Sarika. So can I have my slides? I'm not going to tell you all the aspects of endoscopic sinus surgery, but on the other hand, I'm going to touch upon the basic principles and also the problems what you can come across and how to avoid in another 15-20 minutes. I'm not going to take much of time. I know a lot of surgeons are doing endoscopic sinus surgery here and also all over the country and the world. But quite often we forget the fundamental and basic principles which are very, very important all the time. Can I have the hand mic? I think that is better. I'll go and stand there. This is better, I believe. Why this topic is, it is not something new, but to remind and re-emphasize the basic principles, and basic principles are quite often forgotten to make less discomfort to the patient and more comfort to the surgeon and less problems during surgery, so-called the endoscopic sinus surgery. And it, of course, it benefits a lot to the patient and the minimal injury to the tissues, and the hospital stay is very minimal. It more or less, it says physiological, still there is some question on that. And the healing process, whether it is faster healing, is still. Of course, the cost is slowly increasing because of various reasons, which we'll be seeing quite quickly. Of course, from nearly 35 years, more than 35 years, from Messerklinger and Stamberger and Vigan and Kennedy started this. I remember that in early 90s, I attended a cadaveric workshop run by none other than Stamberger at JJ Hospital, Mumbai. And when I went to the UK to do my fellowship, but everyone told me that go and learn the endoscopic sinus surgery before you come back. Well, that was the flavor that time. And I think even before that, Tulsidas spent quite some time in Austria, I believe. So a lot of changes have happened. And of course, one should not forget and take it for granted or leave away the basic principles, because this is very, very important to have a very good result. What are the common issues we come across? Preparation which is not good. In endoscopic sinus surgery, the binocular vision is not there. Of course, we have very rigid instruments and it is difficult to see the corners. That's why we have seen the multiport just a while ago, and using only one hand to operate, one hand to hold the scope, fogging, and even very minimal bleeding. It is very difficult to visualize the nasal cavity inside. We had a very good food this afternoon. For everything, even a very good food, you need a very good preparation. Unless you don't have a good preparation, it will not be tasty. Same thing for the surgery also. If you want a very clean surgery, a good surgery and a good outcome, you need to have a lot of time in preparing the patient, which we forget quite often. I think it's very important for the youngsters also. So according to Benjamin Franklin, by failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail. I think this is one of the very, very valid statement, very important, and for a surgeon, for any surgeon, this is very important. So you have to prepare yourself in every aspect of the surgery. So commonest conditions where we do endoscopic sinus surgery is, of course, the chronic sinusitis and the nasal polyposis. And you must not remember, both are basically amenable to medical treatment. Most of them. And many a time we do not give adequate medical treatment. We give 5 days of antibiotics in case of chronic sinusitis, which is not sufficient. According to me, at least 3 to 4 weeks you should give and review the patient. And the surgeons try to attempt the surgery before giving a good medical treatment. Even after the surgery, you have to continue the medical treatment many occasions, which is very important. That's why it is basically, they are the medically amenable to the medical treatment. Okay? And of course, what are the things under the preparation? A good history, of course, I need not tell that. In my place, see, we have a lot of the spinning mill and the power looms. So people are very much exposed to the cotton dust. They are known allergens to many of the patients. So even after a good surgery, when they go back to the same place, they tend to get the symptoms back. So we need to have a good history and interact with the patient and explaining them what is going to be expected. Of course, the endoscopy examination is very, very important. I need not emphasize on the CT scan study. It is a roadmap for the surgeon, endoscopic sinus surgeon, and adequate amount of nasal local steroids and antibiotics whenever it is necessary, treat the allergy and the infection, and documentation, which is very poorly done by the surgeons these days. Unless you have very good documentation, it is very difficult for you to substantiate, and these days you need to have a digital recording of what you explain to the patient also. This is very, very important. Many times our surgeons, they fail in this. So need for surgery, when the surgery is indicated, when there is failed medical treatment or when there is a complication, which we have seen already. And it is better to avoid surgery when the CT scan shows minimal mucosal thickening in a patient with headache. Commonly they say headache means sinusitis, sinus headache. They come with a preconceived idea. And quite often in these days we say one of the commonest problem is vascular headache, otherwise called the migraine. So the moment you see some mucosal thickening in the sinuses and minimal nasal discharge, you should not brand them and go for the surgery. So what surgeon needs? Excellent knowledge of the anatomy, and you should train yourself to have a meticulous work, and you need a lot of experience for that, especially in endoscopic sinus surgery. And anybody can do the surgery, but you should be capable of tackling the complication whenever you see, and prompt recognition, and you should have the capacity and capability and caliber to handle the complications. That is very important for any surgeon. And already mentioned, there is no binocular vision in the endoscopic sinus surgery, but having said that, which is overcome by excellent monitors these days. But here again you need to have very good eye and hand coordination. Without this, probably the younger generation can do that. Quite often they play with their mobile phones and the video games and everything, but older surgeons had a tough time to have a eye and hand cooperation, which is again you need a lot of training for that. Of course, now we have image guided surgery has come in endoscopic sinus surgery, and not many can afford to buy these equipments, very costly, and probably Dr. Tulasidas can afford to buy one because he is so much keen in the sinus surgery. This gives a lot of precision, accuracy, and you can very well know where you are going. But having said that, it involves a lot of money and training. It's not that easily available. Of course, one has to have beautiful instruments to have a good music. Likewise, very good instruments to have a very good surgery. And one should not compromise in getting the instruments. They have to invest everything from their own pocket. It's very, very difficult. And what to buy? Today I see an instrument, fantastic instrument, I like to buy it, but may not be useful in suction. That is the important thing. You should have a very good suction instrument to have a very good surgery or bloodless field. But in otology, I quite often love to use only one instrument along with the suction, is the double-ended probe, that is called one side the flap knife and the other side the sickle knife. Likewise, you have very few instruments you can have. Apart from the Becclessery forceps, the true cut forceps are quite useful, and you should know your limitations and when to intervene. And in a peripheral setup, it is advisable to have the common procedures, do it extremely well, and the difficult procedures, it is better to refer it. So in this way you can avoid problems, end up in problems when you are doing the surgery. And of course the power instruments, microdebrider, touchwood, I bought it way back in 15-16 years, and still is a workhorse for me. I invested in one of the best company and it's going all right. And of course you have the other things like robotics is coming up in the sinus surgery also. In everywhere it is robotics now. I don't know what will happen after 20 or 30 years. Probably a robot will be coming here and giving a lecture, I don't know. This is going to be the future or not, and it's very difficult to say now, but this is all happening. Robotic endoscopic sinus surgery. Again, the cost, investment, all those things quite a lot. But nothing can replace a good surgeon with a good surgical anatomical knowledge. Nobody can compromise on that. Another problem endoscopic sinus surgery is fogging. So we avoid fogging. It is like a ghost to the endoscopic sinus surgeon. So it in fact prevents good vision and chances of injury when there is a poor vision, repeated cleaning. You know, you have to ask the anesthetist, give a packing, we have anti-fog solution. Even then, and we have to never and then, you have to put the anti-fogging solution, clean it and put it back, put it back. So these are the problems in endoscopic sinus surgery. What happened? Well, one hand, single-handed, one hand all the time, you have to hold the scope, and you have to only one hand to do that. But now, having said that, in ear surgery also, endoscopy is creeping in. Many surgeons, they tend to avoid microscopic work and they go for endoscopic work in the ear surgery. Okay, and this can be overcome with proper good practice and with proper instruments. Well, another big problem, a nightmare for one of the in nasal surgery. You know that nose is a very highly vascular organ, and even the moment you touch, even giving the injection, you get a lot of bleeding. So you'll have to have a good preparation, and you should know how to avoid bleeding, control bleeding, and if there is a bleeding, what to do. When there is a bleeding, it's better to avoid the surgery, not to go ahead. These are the basic fundamentals one has to keep in mind all the time. But sometimes you have to swallow your pride and come out gracefully, pack it, and go and tell the patient's attender, and this is not the right time to do it, and this is not my day. You have to have the courage to do that. Nothing is going to be bad about that. Don't feel bad about that. The importance is the safety of the patient is very important, rather than you say, I have done the surgery, but the result is going to burn your finger on the end of the day. So it is highly important that when there is high bleeding, you have to stop the surgery. So then how to control the bleeding? A good PP control. And if there is a bleeding, then you have to do a lot of repeated suctioning, and it's difficult to do the also because your regular anesthetist is gone for a vacation, holiday, and you call him new anesthetist, he does not know what it is, and give anesthesia, and you will end up in problem. I think this is the problem in the rural setup. Many a times it happens. So it is better to postpone the surgery until you have your own anesthetist. And so intermittent decongestant nasal packing is very important. And nowadays we have inhalant anesthesia and IV anesthesia. Here the propofol and remifentanil is very good. 30% reduction in the basic mean arterial pressure is ideal, and you have a head up position 10 to 15 to right. Another thing, before you go for the surgery, think about the associated medical conditions. These days, every other patient is a diabetic. Every other patient is having some antiplatelet drug. And these things we tend to forget, and this happens. We don't get a good history and don't think about the associated medical condition, or not going into the lab investigations properly. And many patients, they do not say their previous problems or medical problems, and in that case you will again have problems. So this is very important, and you must always keep in mind. Discussion, and this one with the patient also, the expectations of the patients are very high. Nobody likes to have even a slightest complication. Nowadays patients are very intolerant to even a very limited amount of pain. See, they do a beautiful surgery and they can eat and drink, and next day morning they can go. Even that also they will say some amount of complaint. But you should understand and underplay the expectations of the patients. Don't give tall promises. So that is another thing, and have an open discussion. And many known complications like injury to the orbit, injury to the optic nerve and to the skull base. Yes, there are there, but some of the patients, they will come and ask these intelligent questions after browsing through the internet and all, and you will be in a position to handle them very gracefully and tell them, yes, these are the complications, but I am sure that we will avoid all those things. So these are the open discussions we need to have. Nasal packing, very important, and it should be done by the surgeon himself. I don't know how many of you do that. It should be done by the surgeon itself at least 2 times. And here we only have the xylocaine, other things. In Western countries, we have the cocaine, one of the very good local decongestant. It makes the mucosa bone dry, and it will be very, very fantastic for the surgeon to have the sinus surgery. So why do we have problems during surgery? We will have problems some next, but you should anticipate. And why do we have routinely, regularly means some of the problems here, inadequate preparation, again enough to give a good CT scan and a report, and you should equip yourself to study the CT cuts and not having a proper instruments, and you don't plan your surgeries before you go in. So of course all these things I am not going to go. All these things you have to study very carefully with the CT scan, and very limited surgery can be done here. Just opening up will clear the disease, and sometimes without any, I already told you, a CT scan with the minimal mucosal thickening, you should not intervene. Give good medical treatment, the patient will be happy, and you need not to have unnecessary surgery. And one of the sphenoid sinusitis, very much amenable to endoscopic sinus surgery, very good results can give. And this is one of the problems in post-operatively, the synechia formation. Patient comes with the nasal block and goes with the nasal block. So we don't have much time to spend post-operatively. Tell them what to do, how to clean the nose, how to do nasal toileting meticulously, and to have a nasal douching or wash. All these things we do not have time to educate the patient. These are the things why you get synechia. So synechia means, one of the dreadful problems. It is difficult to treat. So patient will have blocked nose, and again the old symptoms will be there. So you should have a very clear-cut post-operative schedule. You must have your own and follow it very strictly. Educate the patient. If you are so busy, tell your staff nurse or your assistant to tell them, or give them printed matter to take home, read them, ask them to read properly, and strictly follow it up. Even post-operative, they should have antihistamines and the nasal sprays, and so that you can avoid all these problems. This is one of the 7 years follow-up. You like to have an excellent post-operative result like this, and again it's 9 years. I think I basically touch upon what to do and what not to do to have a good outcome, because the topic is very huge. I think I have completed within the stipulated time, and thank you very much for the wonderful opportunity for your patient hearing on this lecture. Thank you, sir.
Sir, I think from the advanced technology to back to the basic something, and actually real life challenges which are faced maybe by all the ENT surgeons beautifully covered. Now I request both the doctors to come for a panel discussion, and if the audience has any question, please let us know, and the audience also who is watching us from the road, please give us the questions if you have any to our area manager who is there, or you can also type in the login box which is provided. Anyone? Two mics.
could be anything. Don't get scared to ask any question, whatever may be the smallest doubt, you'll be able to.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I have two questions for Dr. Tulasidas, sir. Regarding the multiport technique for frontal sinus, do we need a neurosurgeon beside us, sir, while doing the surgery? Should we get a neurosurgery opinion?
No, doctor, I don't think neurosurgeon is necessary. Unless you are doing a pituitary surgery, I don't think a neurosurgeon is required to repair. So you have to take charge and you have to do the repair, right?
Okay.
In a pituitary, it's different. You know, sometimes you could have a complication. You may end up in the sinus or injure one of the main vessels or the intersinus, connections. So complications, when you make two holes, sometimes the in between the bone may break. In such a case, you have to put a wire across, and that will prevent depression in the forehead. So that is one complication. Otherwise, hardly there is any complication. And of course, the scar, you have to learn to hide the scar, the eyebrow. Under the eyebrow is better, over the eyebrow also is okay, but you have to learn to suture it meticulously so that the scar is not very visible.
Thank you, sir.
No, doctor. When I started doing this repair, tissue glue was not available. That itself. So I don't think if your surgery is not meticulous, you're not prepared your graft bed properly, whatever material you use is going to fail, whether it's tissue glue or something else. There is no control study which says use of tissue glue improves the results. It's nothing like that. I don't use tissue glue at all.
No, we don't use tissue glue at all. The blood, whatever is there, is good. And good surgical technique and meticulous 3-layer coverage and good packing is. I don't hear. The contraindication for the FIS, I don't think any absolute contraindications. There may be relative contraindication. As I already told, give a good medical treatment when you take up the surgery after failed medical treatment. Of course, the contraindications may be associated medical problems could be there, which can be very easily managed these days, because we have very good backup and ICU setups, and where we can handle any patients. There is no emergency situations happening here. So in that condition, I don't see any other contract. Do you think, Dr. Tulasidas, any absolute
No contraindications as such. In fact, as the surgeon gains experience in endoscopic surgery, he is including many more indications. So now without endoscope, we will not go inside the nasal cavity at all. So now there are extended use of endoscopes. We go into the ear, we go do surgery in the pharynx, sometimes use endoscope. Through a transoral surgery into the larynx also we endoscopes. So, the indications are getting more and more. So I don't think there is any contraindication, except like Dr. Raja mentioned, when the patient has been on ecosprin or clopulate, then you would wait till the patient stops it for a few days, something like that, or hypertensive, you control the hypertension, etc. Otherwise, there is no contraindication for sinus surgery.
But one situation I can say, in case of inverted papilloma of the nose, there are two schools, whether you treat it with the endoscope or go for open surgery. Of course, if you do it with the endoscope, if there is recurrence, then you go for the open surgery or radical procedure.
So First of all, thank you so much. It is my privilege to present vote of thanks. I truly appreciate and I sincerely want to thank both of the speakers. I think it was the perfect example of the evidence-based practice plus their own real experience, the perfect combination of that. I think it was sort of a mini surgical workshop that we could have. And also thank you so much for all the attendees. I know that from your busy practice, especially in the afternoon, you all came for this academic event. Please do let us know please about any feedback that you have for us. And thank you to... okay, sir, one more question from Erode Group. This is for a medical sort of question that Erode is undergoing a lot of road works and full of dust. What are the preventive measures to avoid the repeated episodes of sinusitis? Preventive measures to avoid the repeated episodes of sinusitis, considering there's a lot of dust in Erode now.
To have a very good environmental control, probably that is the answer here, because we don't have a good control over I already mentioned, in and around Erode we have a lot of this cotton mills and power looms, and we don't have any control on that, even in Tirupur also. So we get quite a lot of patients with this cotton dust allergy, and nowadays the dust allergy and related medical problems like nasal allergy, in fact the bronchitis, asthmatic bronchitis, the respiratory disease per se, it is on the rise. It is on the rise. The air is so bad in Delhi and Chennai, and it was quite often discussed every year. But what we are going to do for that? Even they have opened up this oxygen showrooms in Delhi. So it's a pathetic situation. But this is not one man's job. It is everybody has to work towards to have a good environment, not for this generation and for the future generation. And there are so many things like nasal filters and are available, but I don't think they are very good in this, and they are not going to give you very good protection on this. Even the mask also is not going to give the good control on this dust allergy. So this is the thing we like to address at large. Otherwise, we have to end up in opening up of more and more oxygen parlors and showrooms.
Maybe some government strategy, because it's not only Erode's problem, it's maybe Mumbai where we come from, or Delhi, like everyone is facing that problem. But with that, I think, sir, we'll close the session, and thank you so much, doctors, for your insights, and especially enlightening us on the various aspects of the frontal nasal surgery and the endoscopic, the pitfalls of FESS, covering it in depth. And thank you all for coming here and attending the session. Thank you on behalf of Procter & Gamble Health. Thank you.
Thank you so much.